My name is Joris de Man and I'm the composer on Killzone 3. I started really early. I come from a musical family. My parents are both in music. My father was a teacher at the Royal Conservatory and he taught music theory and composition. And my mum had quite a strange job. She's a contemporary harpsichord player. So she performs music, but it's all kind of modern music on a harpsichord, which is quite unusual because it's like a Baroque instrument. And I have a brother who used to play a lot in different bands and kind of got me interested into music as well. So there was always music around in the family, and I was interested, but I wasn't quite sure whether I wanted to do it as a living. So I was always kind of involved with music. I played a little bit of violin myself from 6 to 12 in an orchestra. So that's kind of where I got some of my orchestral background. And then at 12 realized that I was never going to get any girls playing the violin, and so I thought, well, I'm going to join my brother's band and play some drums and play some keyboards, and did that for a while. But I was never a really good musician. I was never really a good player. And at the same time, the Atari and the Amiga started happening, and so I got really interested in that, and I got on Atari, and I started writing chip music. So I got involved with the demo scene and started writing Atari chip music, and started to do pretty well at that. And thought, well, this is really interesting, and I wonder if I could do something with the video games. That would be really cool. And because I was born in Holland, in Holland there wasn't really kind of a games industry or anything like that. There wasn't even really any games around. And so I realized if I want to do anything like that, I probably need to go to the UK. And at the same time, a friend of mine had joined this company in Holland who were doing CDI games. I don't know if you remember that, but it's Philips CDI, which is it's kind of a precursor to CD-ROM. And it was a really old, crappy machine that they tried to create these games on. And he said, well, why don't you come over and write some music for us? Because he knew me from the demo scene. And do some music and do some sound effects. So I figured, okay, well, I'll do that for a year, and then I'll go back to study, because I just started studying some music technology. So I did that, and as soon as I started doing that, I thought, well, why do I need to go back to college? I'm already kind of doing what I want to be doing if I come out of college, so why should I go back if I'm doing it right now? So I did a stint of a year of doing this CDI stuff, and it didn't really take off or anything. There weren't big games, there weren't particularly good games, but it was a good kind of grounding. And then I moved to the UK for 3 years, and I joined the Bitmap Brothers. I worked with them for about a year and a half, then joined another startup company. They went bust, and after about 3 years I thought, well, I'm kind of a bit homesick, I kind of want to go back to Holland. And at the same time, a Dutch company was setting up a company called Lost Boys Games, and they were creating these games, and they were just merging together with 2 other Dutch developers. And they started developing this game called Marines, in addition to 2 other games. And Marines is what eventually became Killzone and was bought by Sony. So that's kind of how I got my start. First instrument was a violin, and it's really weird. I don't know why. When I was about 6 years old, I started cutting pieces of paper out of magazines that involved anything to do with violin playing, and I have no idea why I had this idea that that's the instrument, or that's the particular instrument that I wanted to play. But it was almost kind of like a primal thing. Like suddenly, the violin was the instrument that I wanted to play. So I played it for 6 years, and it's really annoying because I stopped playing it, and then a couple of years ago I tried picking it up, and I'm absolutely horrendous at it now. So. I wished I knew how to play the drums better, and I actually recently got a drum kit from my dad, because my dad also used to do some jazz drumming, but he realized he didn't have any room for the kits anymore, so he said, well, why don't you have it? And so I started playing that and realized I can't play that either, so I've started practicing my paradiddles and all the drum practice that you need to do in order to play it, but that's something I like to learn to play really well, actually. Well, my mum used to rehearse a lot of music on a harpsichord, and it was weirdly enough all this kind of modern music like Bartók and Ligeti, kind of contemporary music, and so she used to rehearse in the evenings. And so when I used to go to sleep as a kid, all I would hear in the background was this playing of the harpsichord. So that's probably one of my fondest memories, because whenever I hear a harpsichord, it kind of makes me think of home. So it's it's really nice. I'd started writing music for this company in Holland that were doing Philips CDI games, so that was kind of my first start at it, but those games didn't really go anywhere. And I realized if I really wanted to do something, I'd have to go to the UK and work for a UK-based company, because they were doing the games that I was playing and that I wanted to work on. And so the first company I properly worked with was Bitmap Brothers, and I approached them on a trade show, and I slipped in the demo tape. And it was actually, I went to the wrong trade show. I wanted to go to the ECTS, but I ended up going to the Future Entertainment Show. I don't know if you remember that one. It only happened for like once or twice. And I arrived there and realized that this is not like a developer show. This is like a consumer show. I was like, oh Jesus, I'm not going to meet any developers here, because it's just going to be press and other people. And luckily enough, they were doing a panel with a couple of game developers. So it was Jeff Minter, Eric Matthews from Bitmap Brothers, and I think a guy from Probe Software or something. And they were doing this panel. So once it was done, I kind of stalked Eric Matthews for a while and slipped him a demo tape. And then 7 months later, they called me and said, "Do you want to come work for us?" So I'm one of the early projects in the days before Guerrilla Games was Guerrilla Games and started doing the Killzone franchise. They were a company called Lost Boys Games, and they actually had 3 titles in development. One of them was Marines, which later became Killzone. And the other 2 titles were a game called Whisper, which is almost a slightly Metal Gear Solid-ish kind of game where the emphasis was very much on non-violence. So it was a lot about sneaking around and kind of a third-person adventure, sneaking around game. And Knights, which was kind of a 3D platformer. And on Whisper, because we had such a small team, because I joined the company full-time and I was in-house, there was almost too much time for me to just do music, because sometimes the project wasn't at the stage yet where it needed music yet, because the game was almost in an early stage. So I actually, for the first few months, ended up doing graphics on the project, and I did some 3D modeling and some texturing and some other bits and bobs. And so actually, yeah, I've got very early, very kind of low-level modeling and texturing skills that I actually applied on the project. So something completely different to the composing. I really like people like Gary Scheinman, because I think even though he's a slightly older composer, he's got a really interesting approach to it. I really love the stuff that he did on BioShock. Jesper Kyd is always someone to watch out for, just because I think he's got a very unique voice and I really enjoy his stuff. There's a few other composers out there, Ian Livingston stuff I really like, Richard Jacks I really appreciate. There's quite a few out there actually, yeah. Being an orchestral composer, I listen to a lot of orchestral stuff and especially film scores, because they really inspire me. So a lot of stuff from Don Davis, Harry Gregson Williams, John Williams obviously, Hans Zimmer, those kind of people. I like listening to kind of contemporary orchestral music because it's just quite inspirational and quite useful. People like Penderecki and John Adams. And when it comes to kind of more modern, pop music, I'm a big fan of 9 Inch Nails. I kind of like the harder edge stuff. And on occasion I like myself a bit of Muse. That's it, really. I think film music in general is probably a very big influence. It's always interesting because obviously the film music approach isn't necessarily always the best approach for a game. But when you are doing kind of orchestral scoring, a lot of the film music that's out there, so like John Williams and stuff, and Hans Zimmer, and yeah, some of the other film composers that are out there, just listening to their stuff I always find very inspirational because there's such a large variety of it as well. So that's always a big influence on me. Well, a while back I completed the sound design for the trailer for Dust 514, and that's a pretty big game coming out sometime soon. And early this year I did also a game for the Xbox Live called Scrap Metal, which is quite a departure from my usual orchestral fare because there's all kind of rock guitars and drums and stuff, and a bit of 9 Inch Nails influence in there. So that's the stuff I've been working on recently. Usually it's kind of looking at the artwork first and looking at the level and kind of trying to get a feel of what it is about, and what are kind of the discerning factors of this level? Is it the environment, or is it the characters that are in the level, or is it what the player is doing that's significant? So trying to figure out that first, and then sometimes I end up temp tracking it. So I try to find pieces of music, either my own music or existing pieces of music, to kind of fit the scene and kind of see, well, what works with this particular level, what kind of style of music works with this, and once I've got a more kind of clear idea of what the music is that needs to go with that particular level, I start sketching things out. So I'll just start with the piano patch and start bashing things out, and my piano playing is absolutely horrendous, so I'd be absolutely worried to have anyone hear that stuff. But once I've done that, I start dishing it out a bit more with orchestral instruments and synths and that sort of thing. Well, one thing I think is really important is to know your tools, because especially when you're kind of composing for video games, it can get quite technical, and you really got to know the tools that you're using. So know your software. If you're using a sequencer, know the ins and outs of the sequencer. If you're using samples, don't just know about the libraries, but know how to program your own samples. So you can tweak patches and you can really make them your own, or you can even sample your own instruments if you want to. If it comes to synth programming, really know how to program a synth and how to get the best sounds out there that are kind of more customized to your own particular style, as opposed to just using sounds that are off the shelf, because that really creates your own musical identity. So I think those kind of things are very important, because that will allow you to basically set yourself apart from the rest. There's one I really like, which is the Dutch one, which is beschuitlul. Which literally translated is biscuit dick. And it's kind of an Amsterdam slang word for asshole, but it's such a peculiar one, because biscuit dick doesn't really mean anything. It's quite peculiar, so that's probably my favorite one.